She told me that with great power comes great responsibility.
The lead up to Spider-Man No Way Home rivaled Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame as one of the most exciting times to be a comic book movie fan. We were in the middle of a global pandemic, the Infinity Saga had ended, and the future of the movie industry was uncertain. But No Way Home broke through all of that, and in these past 2 years, no movie has even come close to the cultural phenomenon that was Spider-Man No Way Home. The question is, does it really hold up? Welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy. And look, while I adored Spider-Man No Way Home and how it brought back legends like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Willem Dafoe to the Spider-Man franchise, there is part of me that wonders if the film was actually as good as we all remember. So let's take a look back and see if this movie really was the golden unicorn masterpiece we all said it was, or if we all maybe have been a little bit nostalgia drunk. Nostalgic not only for the Spider-Man of yesteryear, but nostalgic for the big event films and the shared experience with an audience of fellow movie fans. And by the way, everybody, if you like what we do here and you want to support our channel, please check out our merch store, ScreenCrushMerch.com, where we design all the merch ourselves. Right now, we have this Doug S. Spider-Man meme shirt and these sweet Nelson and Murdoch Law and Order and Scales of Justice t-shirts. Our designs are also available on hoodies, and if you want to see the ScreenCrush team live on February 22nd in Brooklyn, New York, the link for tickets is below. The tickets are almost sold out, so snatch those up while you can. Our number one complaint with this movie is something that was honestly out of the filmmaker's control, and that's the fact that you can tell this movie was shot during a pandemic. This film's story is one of massive scale, but the movie itself feels very small and confined. And notice I didn't say intimate. Intimate would have been nice, but this movie, however, felt more like it was locked in a cage.
I didn't sign up for a cage match!
3 of the movie's biggest scenes take place in apartments. Apartments. Peter Parker meeting Matt freaking Murdock. Daredevil himself making his MCU debut took place in a dining table in an apartment. Us learning that Peter's legal woes were now behind him took place in an apartment. Not an interrogation room, not a courtroom, an apartment. We didn't get to see Matt actually be a really good lawyer. They just had him say it a whole bunch.
I'm a really good lawyer.
We didn't get to see Matt getting snippy with the damage control guy or arguing Peter's case in court. They just shoehorned all of that into a single scene with him sitting around a table talking. Granted, this part was pretty great. The scene showing Peter trying to cure the villains and then the Green Goblin and Electro turning on him all takes place in an apartment. The triumphant return of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man take place in an apartment. People in small rooms sitting around and talking make a story on this scale feel small. I had a similar complaint with Secret Invasion. They're supposed to be this huge global threat, but it's just a bunch of scenes in small rooms with people sitting and talking. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what No Way Home was too. I mean, we'll talk about this in more depth later, but I think that Far From Home set up this incredible premise with this line.
People didn't believe, and nowadays they'll believe anything.
I wanted to see Peter Parker grapple with that, with the idea that people have turned on him simply because of a media propaganda machine. After all, this goes all the way back to Amazing Spider-Man #1, when Peter thinks he'll be praised for saving an astronaut, but instead, J. Jonah Jameson blasts him in the press. I mean, had No Way Home tackled this storyline, this would have been so relevant to our lives today, when it's really hard to see through media bias and just get like the straight facts from a news story.
Yeah, I guess the only thing we can do is unplug, just stay in our homes and ask to be left alone forever.
Actually, Doug, lately I've been using Ground News, the sponsor of this video. Ground News is an app and website that gathers related articles from across the world into one place. But they give you the context about the source's political leaning, their reliability, and their ownership. So this means that you can see through the bias and think critically about the news that you consume.
Wow, so take that, Uncle on Facebook.
Exactly, take that, Uncle. High five. And all of this is backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. So let me show you an example. Here's a story about Elon Musk, a pretty divisive figure, saying that they have implanted their first chip in the human brain, which sounds scary and gross, but let's get the real facts here. Ground News says this story was covered by 180 sources, 23 left, 38 right, and 37 in the center. When you scroll down, you can see every article covering this story and which way they lean, and you can find out the real potential benefits and drawbacks of this new chip. Next to every headline, we can see the context, like who owns the source, how reliable it is, and if they have a political bias. Like it mentions that left-leaning outlets are talking about the financial penalty imposed on the company that made the chip, while center and right-leaning outlets are omitting that information. But my favorite feature on Ground News is called Blind Spot, which shows you the stories that you probably aren't seeing because your social media algorithm might lean one way or the other. This is a great way to get news that you missed so you can stay better informed and well-rounded. I mean, guys, Ground News is an incredible resource, and I've been looking for something like this this for years, so I highly encourage you check them out. If you go to ground.news/ScreenCrush, you'll get 30% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to every single feature. Or you can try their Pro plan for less than $1 a month, totally worth it. Your subscription will not only help this channel, but you'll also be supporting an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. Now, back to No Way Home. So in No Way Home, I wanted to see more interaction and literal movement with these three Spider-Men, but all we really got to see were these stationary shots of them on a rooftop, and this scene in a classroom, and this scene of them standing around talking on a green screen, or should I say blue screen. We didn't get to see the three of them swinging through New York City together and having these conversations. They're just standing there. And sure, we got these great swinging and landing shots before the final battle, but it was really short, and it doesn't make up for the fact that the bulk of this movie felt small. I mean, even if you take a film with a smaller scale story, like Raimi's first two Spider-Man movies, those still felt like they took place in a big, busy New York City. Even the scenes in those movies that took place in rooms with people sitting around and talking felt grand. Take this shot from No Way Home of Spider-Man and the Green Goblin in their final fight and compare it to this fight between Spider-Man and Green Goblin in the first movie. This one feels brutal and high stakes, and you can almost feel every punch, whereas this scene just feels small and kind of underproduced. The whole thing is shot from one angle because they didn't want to have to build the other side of the set, and you can just tell they were standing on a blue screen. Despite Holland and Dafoe giving phenomenal performances here in this final fight, the scene just wasn't captured well, and that makes it feel cheap.
Person, I have a complaint.
What you got, buddy?
The title is dumb.
The title is kind of dumb. I mean, I get where they were going for the whole home thing again, but really, it's this movie that should have been called Far From Home. No Way Home doesn't even really apply to this story. It's not like anybody got trapped in a universe that wasn't their own. They always had a way home. I mean, I guess you could say that it applies to Peter not getting to return to his life following the Forget Peter Parker spell, which we'll discuss in a minute, but like even that is a reach. And the title's not the only thing that didn't make sense. The entire plot didn't really make any sense. I mean, think about it. The major consequence of Peter Parker's identity being revealed to the world as Spider-Man and him being framed for murder, the main consequence here is that his friends didn't get into MIT.
In light of recent controversy, we are unable to consider your application at this time.
The reveal of Spider-Man's identity at the end of Far From Home should have been setting up a movie where Peter had to prove his innocence to the world, show him struggling in a legal battle with Matt Murdock by his side, show Spider-Man and Daredevil tracking down Mysterio's warehouse looking for evidence to clear Peter's name, borrow from the comics and have J. Jonah Jameson hire Matt Gargan as Scorpion to hunt down Spider-Man and bring him to justice. Scorpion was already set up in Spider-Man Homecoming.
This? It's not on you. It's on our little spider friend.
And we could have seen Gargan freed from prison since Spider-Man is the one who caught him. But instead, the whole secret identity and frame for murder storyline is put on the back burner in like the first 20 minutes of the movie. It felt like they wanted to make a multiverse movie, but they needed to find a way to make the Far From Home setup play into it, so they worked it kind of backwards. Peter Parker asking Doctor Strange to reverse time so his friends could get into college is so weird and out of character. I mean, I know he's still a kid and he cares about his friends, but after the life lessons he learned in Homecoming, Infinity War, Endgame, and Far From Home, you'd think that Peter would have matured beyond making this kind of request. You'd also think that Peter would have had some kind of moral obligation to brainwashing the entire planet, and the spell itself doesn't even make any sense. It's supposed to make everybody who knows Peter Parker as Spider-Man forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. But somehow, the spell being interrupted makes it to where characters from other universes who know Peter as Spider-Man get pulled into this universe? Even for a magic spell, that's a big logic leap. And there are just so many inconsistencies with Marvel's multiverse logic, like this scene.
Do you know a Peter Parker who's Spider-Man?
Yes.
Is that him?
No.
See?
This implies that variants from other universes must look different from one another, but we know from Loki that that's not the case. In the Loki series, which came out before No Way Home, they showed us that variants could look identical or look very different. And in Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange sees multiple variants of himself that look just like him.
You guard the Darkhold in this universe? Yeah.
Now granted, that movie came out after No Way Home, but it was supposed to come out before No Way Home. Anyways, that's beside the point. What I'm trying to get at here is even if we're generous and say that at this point in time, Strange doesn't know much about the multiverse, it still doesn't make sense why he would say that line with such certainty. And this all comes down to the fact that Marvel had no definitive rules for their multiverse. I'll say it again. Marvel never had definitive rules for their multiverse, and the various shows and movies were not communicating with each other about how to best serve this overarching story. Okay, so now let's talk about the villains. Willem Dafoe back as the Green Goblin was absolutely brilliant. I don't have a single negative thing to say. The same goes for Alfred Molina back as Doc Ock.
Hello, Peter.
Jamie Foxx is also great as Electro, definitely improvement over this. His lightning changing from blue to yellow is fine, and that could be explained away with different universes having different energy or whatever.
It's different. I like it.
But him going from this to this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I thought everyone brought in by the spell had to know Peter Parker was Spider-Man, and Electro didn't know Peter was Spider-Man.
That's a great point, buddy. The whole premise was that the botched spell brought in people who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man, but we never saw Electro learn Spider-Man's identity. They did try to throw in this quick little line here where he learned it by absorbing Oscorp data.
I was stuck in the grid, absorbing data.
But then, at the end of the movie, he's disappointed to learn that Spider-Man isn't black.
I just thought you was gonna be black.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
Now, I guess you could say that he didn't absorb the photographic data of his universe as Peter Parker, but now we're already like 3 layers deep into far-reaching assumptions to make a plot point work. And then we have Sandman and the Lizard, who had no business being in this movie. Don't get me wrong, I love their characters in their respective movies. Maybe not the Lizard. But in No Way Home, their characters were just sort of there for the sake of being there. Doc Ock, Goblin, and Electro all deduced that they were about to die before being pulled into the MCU. So you can understand why those 3 would have motivation to fight to stay there. But this Sandman was the redeemed version of the character from after Spider-Man 3. And the Lizard never died. He was cured and arrested. And we even got this stupid line where they touch on that.
Max, do you know? Do I die?
And they don't answer him. They just move on. They could have easily been like, well, no, you don't die, but the Lizard part of you dies and Connors goes to jail. But if they did that, then they'd have to actually give the character some attention, which they obviously were not interested in doing. They even had him awkwardly stay in the truck for the apartment scenes.
Where's Connors? He told me he wants to stay in the truck.
I mean, really? You left the giant multiversal lizard unsupervised in the back of a truck? It doesn't make any narrative sense. It's clear that they just didn't want to deal with the CGI and logistics of putting a big lizard in that already crowded apartment. And as for Sandman, he wants to get back home to his daughter, right? That's a noble cause. So why is he fighting Spider-Man, whose only goal is to cure him and send him back home? And if he wanted to keep his sand powers, he could have just explained that he's not a villain and his mind is not corrupted by his sand powers and he just wants to get home. Hell, he could have even asked if this universe had a cure for his sick daughter.
In the infinite multiverse, there's a cure for every illness.
This Sandman is supposed to be a redeemed character and not a villain. Yet, here he is, turning into a giant sand monster and fighting Spider-Man on the construction site of a tall New York City tower. These 3 villains, Electro, Sandman, and Lizard, aren't ever there together to fight the Spider-Man. They just all showed up and started fighting the Spider-Man seemingly without cause. And the filmmakers knew this because they tried to throw in these random bits of dialogue addressing the fact that it doesn't really make sense for them to be there.
We can help everyone!
I don't care!
The only villains with a motivation to stay come the final battle are Electro and then Green Goblin, and Goblin isn't even there for most of the fight. And why did we get to see Toby and Goblin have a rematch? Toby and Ock too, for that matter. And yes, speaking of Doc Ock, yep, he is cured now, but his fate isn't going to be any different once he gets sent back home. He's still going to need to sacrifice himself by drowning his machine in the river to save New York City.
I mean, actually, maybe that's what he does in Spider-Man 2. Maybe that's why he ended up saving everybody.
That's a good point. Maybe this movie does fit in continuity with Spider-Man 2. That actually sounds really neat. In fact, maybe when Norman Osborn says this,
Don't tell Harry.
that's actually cured Norman Osborn suddenly appearing in that scene. Anyways, they should have taken Lizard and Sandman out of the movie and had Green Goblin, Electro, and Doc Ock team up against the 3 Spider-Men. The villain's motive would be that they don't want to be sent back home to die.
We perish?
No thanks, I'll pass on that.
And the Spider-Man's motives would be to cure the villains and send them back to save reality. That's the movie. But for some reason, they shoehorned in 2 other completely CGI villains because in Sony's mind, more villains is best, despite having been proven wrong on that theory twice with Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So now let's talk about the Forget Peter Parker spell. It's dumb. I appreciate that we got to see Peter Parker make this huge sacrifice to save the universe. That's very Peter Parker. It was also very Peter Parker when he decided not to remind MJ and Ned who he was so they could have normal lives. That's all great. It's cool that we can now see Peter Parker go from being a celebrity to a literal nobody. I like that as well. But it all goes back to the spell not making any sense to begin with. As we discussed, there is no logical reason for all these random villains from the multiverse to be pulled into the MCU. And if the reason they're all being brought into the MCU is because they know Peter Parker is Spider-Man, then why can't Strange just recast the spell making them all forget Peter Parker is Spider-Man?
Doesn't make sense.
Well, Peter asked this very logical question and Strange says,
Too late for that, they're here. They're here because of you.
What does that even mean? First it was they're being brought in because they know Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but now it's just because they know Peter Parker, and if it's too late to cast a spell because they're already here, then why would a different spell making them forget Peter Parker work?
Now I'm feeling confused and uncomfortable.
There is no logical explanation for anything they're saying, and they are not obeying any of their own rules. Things are just happening because the script says so. We're just being told A, B, Z, D, and Y without it making any kind of sense. And by the way, if these multiversal beings in the sky all forget who Peter Parker is, then doesn't that mean that Peter 2 and 3 are going to be forgotten in their own universes too? You would think that might be something Peter 1 would want to share with them before they go back home.
But this time, make everyone forget who Peter Parker is. Make everyone forget.
And by the way, Peters 2 and 3 got brought in because they know Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fine. And when the Forget Peter Parker spell is cast, they get sent home too. So does that mean that they're going to forget themselves? I mean, the whole thing makes little to no sense. It was given very little thought, and it just feels like all of it was meant to be there as a way to write themselves out of the corner that they painted themselves in at the end of Far From Home. And even if you were able to write out some long explanation jumping through all these hoops and try to make it make sense, you've already lost the game. The story should not be this complicated. I can suspend my disbelief to watch a wizard float in the sky and cast spells, or 3 guys with spider powers interact across universes. But when the basic bare minimum logic of your entire plot crumbles so easily under the slightest bit of thought, that does not make for a good story. And it makes the movie feel rushed, unthought out, and a waste of time.
Yeah, but seeing the 3 Spider-Men together was pretty cool.
Yes, it was. High five. And let me be clear. We don't hate this movie. We actually love this movie. It did more for the MCU and the theater industry than any movie in a long time. It had action, it had heart, it was funny, and in a thumbs up or down world, it is a big thumbs up from us. But I can't help but imagine how much greater it could have been if it hadn't been burdened by the pandemic. How much greater it could have been if the story had been given a little more thought and could withstand even the slightest line of questioning.
Good thing it's got a really good lawyer.
I'm a really good lawyer.
I feel like overall Sony just rushed this multiverse concept. The Spider-Man 3 that was set up by the first 2 movies was clearly going to tell a smaller scale story like we talked about earlier. I wanted to see a movie about this Peter Parker struggling to come of age while also grappling with this newfound unwanted celebrity. I wanted this to reflect more like Peter's journey in the comic books, where he's this put-upon hero who tries his best to help people even though the world doesn't seem to want or need his help sometimes. They should have rounded out this small scale trilogy with a small scale story. And also, even though I love seeing Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina back, I mean, don't you kind of want to see Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin like introduced in the MCU as MCU reimaginings? Wouldn't that have been really cool? I mean, at this point, if they're only ever going to bring back villains who have existed in other universes instead of reinventing them, and if Sony's going to continue to turn villains like Kraven into like showcases for their own movie, Spider-Man's going to run out of villains really soon if they don't just keep bringing back these old actors. So big shout out to the writer of this video, Mr. Colton Ogburn. He wrote everything except that rant I did there at the end. Do you think that Spider-Man No Way Home struggles to hold up, or do you love it as much as we did when it first came out? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below or add us on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.